Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Not so much the right to bear arms as the requirement. There's been a furious response to images appearing to show armed French police enforcing the ban on full-length swimming costumes known as burkinis on a beach in Nice. The Promenade des Anglais in Nice, named after the English who first bathed here in the 19th century, a slither of gravel epitomizing the glamour of the Riviera. But then, over a month ago, the promenade became the scene of a brutal extremist massacre, and the flowers are here to commemorate the 84 dead. The police are here for added security, but they're also here to patrol a new and bizarre front line in France's cultural war against extremism. That war has now focused on one item of clothing, the burkini. As of last week, the burkini is now banned on the beaches of Nice, following in the footsteps of other French cities. And here is the ban being enforced. Yesterday, this image of Siam resting with her children went viral. 4 policemen ordered her to remove her long-sleeved top and fined her for failing, quote, to respect good morals and secularism. It's not even clear whether Siam was indeed wearing a burkini. It's also not clear whose human rights the police intervention was protecting. But let's be honest, it was unlikely to enhance the security of anyone in Nice. There is so much irony and absurdity about this story, it's hard to know where to begin. On the M&S website, the burkini has sold out. And just what are the sartorial guidelines for them? One can only assume that these nuns are wedded to good morals but reject secularism. Will they now be forced to remove half their garments and pay half the fine? And Aussie lifeguards have been wearing burkinis forever against the intrusive Antipodean sun, against skin cancer. Would they be forced to strip bare on the secular beaches of France? Well, joining me now, the journalist and author Yasmin Abigail-Brown and Kausar Sakrani, who is a burkini designer. Thanks for coming in, both of you. Let me start with you, Yasmin. Your reaction to this picture?
Well, it's scandalous. It's unacceptable. Everybody, I mean, it's been interesting, whatever background, the reaction to these images has been as it should be. As a liberal, which I am, I find that unacceptable. I have to say, as a Muslim, I do want to share my anxieties about the burkini. So I'm torn between 2 positions here. OK, we'll get to those in a minute. What about you?
OK, regarding the burkini ban, I think it's ridiculous. It's stopping us from freedom of choice, and this is what we have as women are fighting, that we should be able to have freedom of choice, and this is the reason why I've developed my product. Freedom of choice to bathe in the sea while... to wear what we want on the beach, whether it's a burkini or whether it's, anything which is protecting us from the sun, anything. People cover up in, all sorts of things nowadays. So when French law says, as it does in Nice and 14 other cities, this is to protect good morals and secularism, I mean, what's your response to that? I just think that it's just a way of attacking Islamophobia. That's what I think. I think they want to dictate what we wear, how we move about. I just feel as if they... Is it revenge for what happened in Nice a month ago? I don't think it's a revenge. I just think that slowly getting to a point is you do as we say, if you want to stay in our countries. I mean, it does seem that in France, secularism is as much a religion as the Islamic faith or Christianity. Yeah, and I don't think bannings and using police are acceptable in any society. But you disagree with the burkini per se? But I also think that one has to think very carefully about why suddenly, until the 80s, mid-80s, Muslim women wore swimsuits and went to the beach, wherever they were. In Egypt, in Morocco, there was no problem. Why is it that we have now reached a place, and I insist, I'm not with the police French on this at all, but we as liberals and as Muslim people have to ask, why are we doing this now? Why are you doing it now, Kausar? I'm doing it because this was made for myself. I'm out there to make it for women, to allow them to integrate, because this is what society wants. They want us to integrate. This is allowing people to cover up. Mostly, I've designed it for the sun's sake. And it's a product that is safe for you to use Whether you're in the swimming pools, whether you're on the beach, wherever you are, it's freedom of choice. If I was to turn around and say to somebody, or say to Yasmin, Yasmin, I don't like the top you're wearing today, I'm afraid you can't go on the beach today, how would she feel?
No, I agree with you, absolutely.
But is it not a cultural development?
Because
what Yasmin's saying is that 20 years ago, you would not have been doing this, you wouldn't have felt obliged to do it. Is that true? Is that fair?
Before, the Burkini has been around for many years, 40 years, 50 years.
No, it's not true.
It's been
That's
around
not true.
before I've
That is
developed
not
my
true.
product, and I have made sure that I have studied and I have researched in what I'm producing. Burkinis have been around for many, many years. Maybe the name Burkini wasn't there, but people have been wearing all sorts of things. Are you telling me that leggings and T-shirts and that wasn't a full covering garment? Are you telling me?
I think also, though, there is a point here that there is an increasing pressure, internal and external, women to cover up, girls to cover up, children to cover up from the Muslim communities. And it's all to do with the your fear of the female sexuality. Why don't you design, actually, this isn't even a joke, why don't you design some beautiful silk masks for men so they don't look at women? And then we'll be in a really good place. I'll buy a dozen from you. Please go
I wish I could
design
do that.
eye hijab for men so that they don't look at us. They don't look at us.
From all the interviews that I've been having, it is the men that are finding this product not suitable, or they're coming out with, oh, this is an oppressed product and they shouldn't be wearing. What do they want to see? Flesh? Because not everybody wants to go through a regime and show flesh. I don't want to, and I'm sure there is a lot of women, whether they're Muslims or non-Muslims, are choosing this product because of the sun safe. Nowadays, cancer is on the rise. But this is why my product is worn.
But isn't there also a case here, Yasmin, of human rights being used to supposedly protect human rights, but actually do exactly the opposite? That Europe, which has been dealing with these cases one after another in the courts, is fundamentally confused on this issue.
This is a crime against all Europeans, because in the place where we are, in Nice, where I was just a few months ago, right, they are encouraging hatred of Europe among some Muslims. Not acceptable, but not acceptable either is the pressure on Muslim women to cover up their sexuality. We're torn.
Okay. Got to leave it there. Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, Kausar Sakrani, thanks for coming in.
It's not always easy being a Western liberal democracy. We like to think we're tolerant of difference and deviance, but at the same time, we do often demand conformity. In this country, we find people who burned poppies on Remembrance Day while shouting gross remarks about British troops. We find people for insulting the Welsh and indeed the English, and we don't encourage people to walk naked through the streets. Does that make us illiberal hypocrites or simply human? Where do you draw that line between individual rights and a constructed norm of social decency? Well, in France right now, they are testing that line. Several towns have banned burkinis, the full body cover used on beaches by some Muslim women. You could say it's the French way of trying to create social harmony by imposing a national view of shared values. In this case, that women are not expected to be too modest. The other way, perhaps more British, maybe, is to create social harmony by the live and let live edict. Now, the problem that's emerged with the French approach is that it has to be enforced, which means policemen, possibly armed, on beaches, instructing women to remove garments. Really? We'll discuss it shortly, but first, here's Hannah Barnes.
Bans on wearing the so-called burkini, a full-body swimming costume which leaves only the face, hands and feet exposed, have been making headlines for the past 10 days. The outfit has come to represent France's internal struggle with how it relates to its largest minority, and it's a debate taking place across Europe. But in the last 24 hours, these photos of armed French police appearing to force a Muslim woman to remove a long-sleeved tunic while she sits on a beach in the southern town of Nice have spread around the world. She's one of at least 16 Muslim women in France to have been fined €38 for, according to the ticket issued to one woman, not wearing an outfit respecting good morals and secularism.
You have 3 armed cops forcing you to undress, fine you because of the way you look like. I mean, Muslim women feel even more stigmatized, but I mean, even if you're not Muslim, it's offensive, it's degrading, it's humiliating. And I don't think it's the job of cops to do that. I mean, they're here to ensure our security, not to be the fashion police.
Nice, where these photos were taken, is one of at least 15 French towns to enforce a ban on access to beaches for anyone wearing improper clothing. The word bikini isn't actually mentioned. The mayor of Cannes, the first French town to introduce the restriction, said, "Beachwear which ostentatiously displays religious affiliation when France and places of worship are currently the target of terrorist attacks is liable to create risks of disrupting public order." Tomorrow, France's highest court will decide whether the bans can stay in place.
It feels like we do not belong here. We are not welcome here. We're not part of this country. The thing is, French Muslims are French. They're part of this society. They built this society. They were part of the people who built France, literally. So we cannot go on like this. And at the moment, the climate is quite despicable.
She may well have reason to be worried. Marine Le Pen's far-right party, the Front National, are currently topping the polls ahead of next year's presidential election. And everyone else is playing to their tune. Former President Nicolas Sarkozy is promising to place new restrictions on Muslim dress and ensure French Muslims adapt to secular life if he's re-elected to his old office. In his new book, which sets out this vision, Tout pour la France, or Everything for France to you and me, Mr. Sarkozy takes a direct swipe at the way we do things here in Britain.
We're not Anglo-Saxons who allow communities to live side by side while ignoring one another. It's time to engage in a determined combat against multiculturalism.
The model that we have in the UK is celebrated across Europe by Muslims because it allows us or enables us to be fully participatory citizens in society without having to have restrictions placed on our fundamental human rights. I find it baffling, like most people, that a modern 21st century liberal democracy in Europe, part of the European Union, an original member of the European Union, can call itself a liberal democracy with universal values of human rights and the progressive values of feminism, when we are dictating what women should and should not wear in public spaces.
The idea that women can be fined because of how they dress is baffling to many people here in Britain, not just Muslims. After the London terror attacks in 2005, there was much talk about whether a French approach of forced integration could be the best way to prevent further Islamist-inspired violence. But today, as France grapples with its identity and security, and when even left-leaning politicians are telling women what to wear, few in Britain are looking to the French for answers.
Hannah Barnes there. Well, joining me in the studio is Shalina Jan Mohammed, author of Love in a Headscarf and Generation M. And from our Oxford studio, Douglas Murray, Associate Editor of The Spectator. Thank you both for coming in. Shalina, you apparently have a burkini.
I do. It's an open secret. I've got one. It just looks like a long T-shirt with a pair of leggings and a swimming cap on top.
Did you know it was going to be such an important statement of any kind when you acquired it?
It looks like a wetsuit that people up and down the country wear, which we need in British waters because it's pretty cold, or you need out in the south of France because it's really hot. So it's not really about the form of the bikini that seems to be at stake here. It's some kind of meaning that's being imposed on it.
Exactly. And Douglas Murray, isn't that what all this is about? And in fact, you've written about this, saying it's a tokenistic thing to fixate on it. It's about the politics of picking on some symbol, however arbitrary, and making a big deal out of something relatively small.
Well, indeed. I mean, in the last 18 months, more than 200 people have been killed in jihadist attacks in France. In the last few days, it's come out from Germany that the German government is looking not only at advising the German people to stockpile essential things like water in case of some mass casualty attack, but it's talking about conscription. And here we are with the summer's big story of French and indeed some German politicians competing to out-idiot each other by talking about the burkini. This is now a European tradition. in the face of a genuinely serious societal problem that radical Islam poses across all of Europe, and obviously has its worst demonstrations in extremist attacks like those in Paris and in Germany in recent months. In the face of that, politicians compete with each other and the media compete with each other about really frivolous things. And the Burkini is a frivolous debate to be having. Not one life is likely to be saved by a woman being fined on a beach in Nice for wearing a burkini. And that's the reason why they're doing it is straightforward, that neither politicians in France, nor politicians in Germany, nor I would argue anywhere in Europe, are able to face up to the massive issues which they have brought about and which they now cannot answer.
Let's talk about whether you think those issues, whether you think there's cowardice. I mean, do you agree with Douglas that to some extent they're just focusing on a little thing because they don't want to talk about a big cultural war between Muslims and the West?
Do you know what? I think we do need to take a moment just to step back and imagine for women all around the country and all around the world what it's like to sit on a beach building sandcastles with your children and have 4 policemen stand around you with handguns and make you take your top off. I think everybody really needs to let that sink in. That is quite serious.
It's why we're discussing it, because it is.
But this is not about just Muslim women. When we have a state and we have police telling women what they can and cannot wear, then we are into very dangerous territory. And I'll tell you which other organisations tell women what to and what not to wear at the barrel of a gun, and that is Daesh and the extremists. And women everywhere should be protesting at this kind of behaviour.
I'm going to put something to you the Mayor of Cannes said. He's actually had quite a lot to say about this because Cannes was the first city. He said, when I took the decision to ban people from walking topless in the streets of Cannes, nobody said a thing about human rights. Apparently he did stop people walking topless.
He probably didn't also say that women who wanted to go for a swim were somehow pledging allegiance to a terrorist organisation.
Yeah, that was his other quote. Yeah, he said it's pledging allegiance. Look, Douglas, which is the better approach to the problem which you think exists? The French approach that Sarkozy is promoting, or the Anglo-Saxon approach that President Sarkozy now says he doesn't think is right, because it means we ignore each other, we tolerate each other, but ignore each other?
Let me very quickly pick up on one of the things that's just been said before answering that, if I may, which is, of course, the parallel that's just been drawn breaks down, doesn't it, when we remember that the French authorities, grotesque as this, I think we are in agreement, is, do not then do to the women what ISIS and the Taliban do, which is to rape them and kill them. So it's a parallel that goes a certain way, but we have to keep this in some context. As for the, as it were, the competing manners of dealing with it, the interesting thing is, Evan, that in the last 15 years, we have had so many manifestations of this. Something blows up in London and people say, maybe we should look to the French model. And then 130 people get gunned down in an evening in Paris. And people say, maybe we should look in France at the Norwegian model or the Swedish model or the German model. And the fact is now is that everybody realizes that none of the models have worked. None of them have worked. They've all broken down. None of them were any good. None of them were fit for purpose. So you see, when Sarkozy now, purely for electoral reasons, obviously says, oh, the Anglo-Saxon model of people living side-by-side parallel communities. Look, if there weren't visual, videographic evidence for it, I would suspect that Nicolas Sarkozy has never been to the suburbs of Marseille or has never been to any suburbs of Paris, because if he did go to them, he would see that precisely that parallel existence exists in France. I would argue worse than any other European country. But it's not really a question of who's done it really well and who's done it really badly. Everybody has failed in the integration. Everybody has failed because immigration at the levels we've had it, and particularly at the levels that Chancellor Merkel has now pushed the continent into having
Douglas?
it, cannot possibly work.
Douglas, the point is understood. I wanted Shalina to get a reply to that. Either model, the French model, the British model, or do you agree with Douglas that no model has worked, Shalina?
The problem is when we try and stitch together ideas around immigration and what women should and shouldn't wear and the idea there's some kind of security and terrorism problem, then we are approaching the issue the wrong way. That's how we end up with policemen telling women to take their clothes off. What we need to think about is how do we enforce the rule of law to allow the citizens to flourish? And that has to be by allowing people to express their values and to participate in society. And if Muslim women want to do that by the way they dress, but actually being part of the public society, then we have to allow them to express that. That is the fundamental of why we live in a liberal democracy.
Thank you both. I'm sure we'll get back to this topic before long.
I've been getting